Glad to have her in this session. We welcome you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you, Divya, and thank you, Vibha. I'm really honored to be here, and thank you for the kind introduction. Yes, it was in 2008, 2009, we started the core certificate program. And those days, we used to have medical students coming over to attend them into Sargur Hospital. Later on, we started this home care program in a very small way, and it's really gratifying to see how far it has reached, and to the extent that we are now celebrating the World Palliative and Hospice Care Day today, and very proud moments for me. So I'm going to begin my presentation of my care and my comfort as given. I hope you can see my screen by now. Vibha?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Screen is visible.
Fine. So for the next 25 minutes or so, I will try to convey some thoughts that I have on my care and my comfort. So this will be covered over to make us understand about doctors' perspectives and the patient's perspective and the gap between them and how to align it. So as the video that preceded this talk mentioned, it is the gap that causes many of the aspects of the difference between what is expected and what is actually happening. All right. So I have finished my MD in 1990, and that was probably when most of you may not have even been born, isn't it? So just to let you know that I am on the more ancient side of the lifespan, and I would want to think that I'm healthy, but there are three most important reasons why I think that I am moving towards aging. One is that the parts of my body like knees and heart and lungs, which I used to take for granted, are making the presence now, especially if I walk fast or climb up the stairs. Second is that I'm not able to remember as well, especially like more than two things. And third is I can't remember it. You see, I can't remember more than two things. So jokes apart. So I am here, I think, more eligible than ever before, being on the wiser side, hopefully, of the lifespan. And here you can see I have purposely put some of my degrees. And I want to discuss today's presentation as someone who did not have these degrees, who was not a doctor, probably, lesser educated, and a homemaker probably. How does this whole healthcare system look from such a person's perspective? So that is something that, I would have liked to see. Okay, I'll just adjust this. Yeah, so this is how we will do part of my presentation. And then in between, I may change the hats and, then let us see how things go. So as I'm getting old, I would want my doctor to definitely to assess me and look at my diagnosis, advise and give me the most ethical and evidence-based treatment. This is what I expect of him or her. And important for me is to understand, can my doctor cure me of my illness? Okay, so this having said, if I have some of the following conditions like pneumonia, an accident, typhoid which has a cure, drug-sensitive tuberculosis. So all these are acute conditions where I am normal generally, and then I lose my health, and then I again get back to normal. I request everyone to please mute their microphones because in this kind of meetings, it is very difficult otherwise for everyone. So in any of these acute conditions, it might be, quite fine that, we look at I am seen in this manner that somebody is coming normal and going back as normal. Now, when I look at the general diseases that contribute to many of the illnesses to age group like me, you can see that in 1990, how the acute conditions used to form the majority. Now, even few years ago, the chronic conditions are more and more, the larger share of diseases. So I may not be in those conditions which I just mentioned, like pneumonia, etc. And the communicable and the non-communicable percentages have changed. And even the pandemic as of now in this year, the communicable has increased, but you know that it is no longer an acute condition. There are multiple sequence to it. And also the number of injuries might have gone down because the road traffic might have gone down. So if I have any of these conditions like heart failure, kidney failure, cancer, stroke, or dementia, then if my doctor looks at me as though I am a normal person walking into the OPD and I'm going back as normal, I don't think I will be served well. So when I want my care and my comfort, I would like to know how many of these conditions, by which I mean heart failure and all these kind of non-communicable diseases, how many of these, my conditions which are likely to happen to me now, are truly curable. So when I ask my doctors, it is very, very unlikely that any of these are curable. Maximum, they are controllable with multiple drugs. So we are looking at conditions which are chronic, and they are going to be progressive over time. And even when I'm discharged, I am not going to be exactly in the same way of health as I was before. And I continue to progress, whether it is diabetes, whether it is kidney disease, whether it is hypertension, whatever it is, it's just going to be many drugs, many complications, and progressive illness. So here, if my doctor looks at me as though I'm in an acute illness, then it is difficult probably. And if they focus only on my organ, which is diseased, the heart or the lungs or kidney, it may not serve me with my care and my comfort. So let me recall a few hospital experiences as a bystander of my friends or neighbors or whomever I know. So here is a story of a 42-year-old who had to leave the hospital on the third day after the surgery, a very, very major surgery. And they had to leave because the money ran out. There was no longer money to pay the bill. And the doctors called it LAMA. I hope many of you, I understand, are medical students and nursing students or doctors or general public. But LAMA stands for Leaving Against Medical Advice. And when you walk out because of reasons where the doctor has not allowed you to go, it is, it's a very tough situation. And when you don't have money, there is nothing else we can do. And even you don't get a discharge note. And you can understand that out-of-pocket expenditure on health as a percentage of private health expenditure is maximum, quite high in India. You can see this is the figures from WHO 2015 statistics. It's extremely high. And there was this report stating that 6 to 3 million are pushed into poverty by health expenses every year, and drugs being the chief cause. So we must understand that people like me who are, likely to take decisions of walking out of a hospital may find it difficult to pay the bills as per the requirement. Now, second example that I have, I request Galaxy A71 to mute their phone. 75-year-old friend, a retired school teacher who was diabetic with high blood pressure, kidney failure, and multiple other diseases, who already had multiple ICU admissions, became febrile, breathless, and was little confused, not talking, was delirious basically, very low oxygen. And what happened, this person was already having multiple issues, and there are some criteria as to when we can do a treatment, but the investigations were done as per protocols, the scans were done, and when the patient became more confused, they were tied up to the bed. I'm sure you all must have seen many of these things happening. So all the time, the focus was on understanding the list of illnesses that is going wrong. At no time, people gave any attention to the person who had come for the illness. What are their issues, and also what would be most important to them during those times. So ultimately, he ended up in a ventilator, which I felt was the most impersonal, sterile, and mechanical, isolated, bewildering way of going away. Of course, he passed away. And I would like to tell all of you, because many of you are doctors, listen, as an old person, I don't want to live forever. Also, I don't want to die forever either. I can't be on ventilator for weeks and weeks for waiting for someone to take a decision. So when you know that something is not working, please communicate with my family. So I hear that patients in hospitals die in one of the following ways only. either they are just like the way I just now described, ICU, ventilator, dialysis, etc., etc., or they'll be just screened out. There'll be some tube feeding given, tied up around the bed, and excluded even from the doctor's rounds because they'll say, this patient is dying. Okay, next patient. So is that the way that, the most crucial part of my life I would consider, where I should be treated with maximum dignity? I am just being isolated into corner of a ward and just screened out. Is that the right way? Third one is, of course, what I described in the first patient, leave against medical advice and go home and get absolutely no support from the medical system. So you see, there are huge gaps, and I'm scared due to these possibilities. So as a person who's aging, I am really, really looking forward to all of you who will be now leaders in healthcare. And I hope you can make a difference to this tremendous, issue in India, because India is the worst place to die. One of the reports which came in the Economist Intelligence Unit report of 2015, India was 67th out of 80 countries as the quality of death index. So it's one of the worst places to die. So you see, by the time it is my time to go, I hope all of you will make a change and make it a better place. Now, is it that because of my economic status or educational status that I'm having a problem? I don't think so, because Parthasarathy Shom, who is an eminent economist, advisor to the Prime Minister of India, he wrote an article in Business Standard in 2016 that I could give no choice to my mother, who pleaded to be taken home. Such was the pressure I felt from the specialist in the ICU to apply the last available biomedical technique despite the emaciated body in extreme distress. So he further writes that even on the day of passing, the doctor wanted to do a liver biopsy procedure. And when he asked him why, he said it was their responsibility to do everything they can. What is everything? So until the very end, the doctors persist. So palliative care, he writes this in that article, palliative care is the pot of gold in modern healthcare. Hardly, you never reach there, it just keeps away, because it is postponed forever. And then suddenly the patient is in so much complexity and suffering that they die on ventilator ICU. There are very rare deaths that are happening naturally nowadays. Most people die in ICU. When we ask the doctors whether they would like to go like that, they clearly have an answer. They don't want to. Even if there is a US trained critical care specialist, do you want to die in ICU? I think most of the doctors would say no. But what do we facilitate for our patients? That, we just say that this is everything they have asked for, and we will give them everything. So cure, when we have this focus on the disease organ or the parameters like, serum creatinine, saturation of oxygen, or, liver function test, those things, then, the focus is very, 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 very small. But when we want to look at care, we would need to change the focus from the organ to the person with the disease. And then it becomes care. Then we include the disease as one aspect of the person, but the whole person's aspirations become as important. So my care and my comfort begins when we are able to see from the point of view of the person who's seeking care. So I hope that in some way I have brought the context of this, this particular terminology of my care and my comfort. And I hope each of you will grow into doctors and nurses who will be looking at the person and, seeing what is best for what is in the best interest of this person. Yeah. So when my doctor, I'm continuing my story as a patient now, as an elderly patient who may progressively have diseases, will my doctor recognize my illness trajectory? Because I'm more likely to have chronic illnesses than acute illnesses, as we saw in the statistics. So are they going to be, so for that they'll have to be trained. I hope they get trained either in MBBS or MD, or at least on their own, like, attending such webinars may be of use maybe. And will they recognize the entire journey of my illness and not look at me as one admission, and as soon as I leave the consulting room, or as soon as I'm discharged from their ward, then everything is forgotten. Then me and my family are left alone to fend for myself. Because in chronic illnesses, maybe one 1% of the illness time is spent with healthcare professionals. Rest of the time, it is the family and the relatives who take care of the patient. So unless they are empowered and educated, they are not able to take care of the patient because patient does not go back into normal health. They continue to have their basic ill health. And so there is a lot of help required from the professionals to help the family continue with the care of the patient. So I would, as what I would want from my doctor is that whatever disease I go with, the list of chronic illnesses are so many, I'm not going to list them, but all of them, why would I go to a doctor? Because I have some discomfort. Either I am breathless, or I'm having swelling of my body, or I'm having severe pain, cough, anything it could be. But they should, of course, try and diagnose my condition. But at the same time, why should I go through the pain? I'm sure the doctors have enough knowledge to take care of the pain. Why does that go into the background? That is one of the things and I would want them to listen to me. What are my priorities? Do I want this dialysis? Am I told anything about, what are the pros and cons of this particular new procedure that is going to be done on me? Do I care for that? Or would I rather spend more time with my family? So I would want these qualities within my doctor. So I don't want them to talk about me, but I want them to talk to me so that I am able to convey what I want to know with them and make a shared decision along with their help, because of course they know more about the disease, but I am the expert of my disease experience. So give me a chance to voice my preferences and please respect my choices and maintain my dignity. So now I call upon Dr. Vibha. I'll stop sharing at this point of time and I request Dr. Vibha to add in a little bit by discussing patient, whichever that comes to her mind, where was there anything that you could achieve by simultaneously utilizing palliative care along with some disease modifying therapy? Vibha, will you be able to join this discussion and help with the webinar today?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. As ma'am said, palliative care is not just the end of life care. It is a ongoing process. From the start of diagnosis itself, the palliative care also begins. So I could remember a patient whom I have seen a year ago. She's from a remote village near Mysore, and she's around 35-year-old. And she noticed a lump in her breast almost 4-5 months ago before coming to hospital. But she was very hesitant to go and show it to any doctor. She thought it will go away by itself. But one fine day, it bursted open and it led to massive bleeding. And at that time, her family bring her to the hospital, and then she was diagnosed to have cancer of the breast. Then she was referred to our palliative care center, especially because she had very severe pain and she had a very big wound on her left breast. So, and simultaneously, her diagnostic procedures was going on, like biopsy and scans and other things were going on, and we were managing her for her pain. And doctors, the treating oncologist suggested she has to undergo a course of chemotherapy and followed by a surgery. And when we were talking to the patient, she had few other concerns. It was not only the disease which was bothering her, because her main concern was she has to come to hospital once in every 21 days for her chemotherapy sessions. And for that, she has to come on the previous day to get her blood investigations done. And next day she'll be getting her reports and she has to get her chemo session done, and then she has to go back home. But her main concern was she has a adolescent daughter at home, and actually she lives with her husband and a daughter. So if she has to come to hospital and stay here for a day, or then it will be very difficult for her to leave her daughter alone there at home, because at least one person has to accompany her to go for the treatment at hospital. And another concern was about the finances, because they both were working as a daily wage earner. It was difficult for her to bear the cost for traveling for 2 days. One day for investigation and one day for treatment. Though they have BPL card and all the treatment were provided free of cost, even transportation charges, they could not bear it. And another issue was the stigma, because when she was diagnosed with cancer, many of her family members stopped coming to her house. They stopped interacting with her. then when what we did was first we managed her pain, and also we managed how the wound also we again we trained her also how to do the wound dressing, how to keep it clean. And meanwhile we contacted her family as well, because her she had a mother as well as her brother was there. We tried to contact them. We asked them to come to our center. Then we had a family counseling. Then we explained them how the disease is, and it is not a contagious disease, so that it won't spread if you are going to stay with her. Then finally, her mother agreed to come with her for treatment, so that her father, her husband, can stay with her daughter. And during the course of treatment, one more issue came up, because she was very scared of all the side effects of chemotherapy, which was explained to her. So she was very reluctant to again to take the second chemotherapy, because she had a hair fall, and after one chemo she had a lot of vomiting, and even she did not the loss of appetite was there. So she felt like, without chemo I'll be better, with chemo I'll be having a lot of this. So I think she felt it is better not to take a chemo with all this pain. Then again we explained her what is the importance of it, because it was still in stage 2 and there is a lot of option for curative treatment. And then again we also give her the option, you come here on for investigations, you give your blood test at the treating hospital, come and stay at palliative care for a day, next day go and take chemo, and again come back, and we will manage all your symptoms. When you feel better, so that you can be managed at home, then you go back to home. In the same way, every time we followed up her over phone, and she could complete her chemo sessions, and meanwhile her pain levels also had come down. And from morphine we had just giving her PCT, and then we stopped that as well. And also wound, she could manage it well at home. And again there was one more decision, to go for surgery or not. Again that was a lot of confusion for her, because anyways at that time even the wound was healing, it was almost better, and she felt, now what is the need for going for a surgery? Again we explained her what is the need of it, and then we supported the family as well, so that she underwent surgery, and now she's coming for regular follow-ups, and now she's disease free. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vibha. So that gave a lot of light on the relevance of palliative care across the disease spectrum. And I can also see in the chat that people are saying, I wish palliative care starts at the beginning of the diagnosis, etc. Absolutely right. And there are several efforts happening to make that happen. And Dr. Balasubramaniam will be talking more about it, giving the definition of WHO's definition of health. So symptom management not only includes physical symptoms, but symptoms of anxiety and all the other emotions that come in. Then social health also is dependent on handling the practical issues of, losing the daily wages. What will happen to my daughter? All those things, they're all practical, and fortunately Indian community is such that neighbors support, and there is a lot of networking possible, and it's just that the family wants to have that little bit of assistance and arrange, some kind of advice to help them handle those critical times. And if we are able to give that, they easily, sail through these difficult times and then get more and more confident, and they become advocates to others. In fact, that is what we have seen. So thank you, Vibha, for that very comprehensive. So I also have, this patient is little later in the trajectory, of course. Patient had cancer of the prostate, but he was unfortunately bedridden purely because of his pain, because pain is such a, anyone would think that doctors will immediately jump and treat it, but unfortunately it is not treated. Doctors always, look at it, is this something curable? Then they try to cure that illness, but they don't think that while I'm curing or while I'm investigating, can I take care of the pain? So unfortunately, this patient who had spinal metastasis, due to severe pain, he was bedridden, and he even developed a bed sore, and patient was unable to lie, sit, move, completely distressed. He was also catheterized, and caring supportive family was there, but how can they do any help unless the treating team teaches them how to reposition, how to prevent bed sore? And then we cannot blame them when they have the bed sore. If we send all of them out of the room when we come on rounds, how are they ever going to learn how to take care of the patient? So this patient Chauhan was treated with, pain relief. Of course, the family was, the communications happened, and he expressed that he wants to attend his retirement function. He was a central government employee, and it's a huge ceremony. He had even stitched he was upper middle class patient, and he had stitched a 30,000 cost suit just for that ceremony before he had this illness. And he was crying while talking about it. But he wanted his son to be engaged. And as we reduced, you can see that he actually got to attend. From the ward, he went and attended. You can see there was a spinal brace on his body. And he's accompanied by his son and wife, and he attended the function. So this is what is, social health. This is what is emotional health. And physical health is also about healing, not necessarily curing. So now we come to further down in my trajectory. As I'm moving, I have got chronic illness, but suppose I get this chronic illness and I'm closer to the end of life. Will my doctor be able to help? So here, some of the important things that I want to talk about are the conversations that we have with the family. Because all of us know this patient is not going to do well. But what do we say? Your mother, she requires, she's having low saturation, blood is not reaching her, the oxygen is not reaching her body properly. We need to put her on ICU and ventilation, and her kidney is not functioning. Dialysis will, all these things will improve the status. And as doctors, when I say that, I'm thinking of this curve improving, the saturation improving from say 82 to 92. Whereas the patient's family, what they understand when I say that the status is going to improve considerably, they understand that they're going to get to take this mother home. So this huge gap in communication, again, can be overcome only by wearing the patient's and family's hat as we think. And that is what is called as empathizing. So when we think from their perspective and communicate in their language, and then we also become a caring physician and not just a technological prescription monsters. So common questions like, some of these you might have already come across as doctors. The doctor says, do you want everything to be done? Because family says, oh yes, please do everything possible, doctor. And we think that, okay, they told me everything. So then I'm putting him on ventilator, ICU, dialysis. But we should understand that the communication is not just verbal communication. There is also an emotional component in the communication. When they say do everything, doctor, they usually mean that we can't bear to see her suffering like this. Please do everything to make her comfortable. Take care of her. They don't understand what it means to shove a tube inside somebody's throat, what it means to be put on muscle paralyzing agents, what it means to be tied up to a ward where you just hear ping, ping, ping of monitors, where your relatives are not allowed. They don't understand. It is for us to understand the larger picture, listen to their emotion and understand what do you mean by everything possible? What exactly are you hoping for? Are you looking at that she becomes more comfortable? All this is important to understand the difference. Second question I want to discuss here, there are many questions, but I'm just bringing up just two. In our experience, only 5% improve with this, chemotherapy or whatever intervention, maybe it's an operation. Family says, please go ahead, doctor. My mother is a fighter. Now, futility is the point that we are trying to make, isn't it? So futility, if as a doctor, if I think the intervention is futile, then it is important for me to and also focus much more on the toxicity of that treatment also. Like, if we simply say this is the only thing left to be done, obviously the patient has not read through done in medicine. So they are going to weigh your language of this is the only intervention possible. And they will think that my mother is going to fall into that 5%. They don't think of the 95%. So it is up to us to explain honestly the toxicities of the treatment, which they are more likely to understand, that this patient will be paralyzed and, all the things that we know that happens, because that is the reason we don't choose to die in ICU, isn't it? Because we know exactly what happens in ICU. Especially, I'm not talking about the absolute relevance of ICU in reversible conditions. I am talking about the futile interventions with multi-system failure, where all of us know that this patient is not going to go out of this ICU alive. Those are the type of patients I'm talking about, that it will not surprise me if this patient were to die in the next few days. In such patients, we have to be more honest. And also when we get out of the ICU and talk to the relatives, we cannot say patient is stable, because How is the patient stable? With a machine pumping some air, with some drips going on to keep the blood pressure up. So we have to say that she's not at all stable, but we are using many medicines in drips, and there's a machine that is artificially pumping. And with that, some BP and all these are being maintained, but she herself is completely unwell. Because the way we communicate these, what makes the picture clear in their head. If we go on avoiding these conversations, then suddenly you will say that patient is not doing well and patient dies. Definitely the hospital windows will be broken, isn't it? That's what we see. So intensive comfort care is as much an option for me, that I want to know these options, as much as intensive intervention care is. But I don't hear much about this option of intensive comfort care. It is intensive because there is as much human effort involved in the comfort care as much as it is required for intervention care, but less machines are involved. And my family will be with me. So this is an important alternative that I would like to know. And I don't want to know this at the doorstep of the ICU. I need to know it much earlier so that I can plan, I can discuss with my children, with my husband, and they are all ready to take on. Because if you ask my relatives to take decisions on my behalf, it is very difficult for them because they're emotional. But if I am allowed to take decisions for myself, I know exactly what is important for me, and I will be able to guide them. This is what I want to do when such a situation comes. So please communicate with me early, doctors and nurses, all of your students, and when you become real doctors, you please remember this and remember the patient's point of view and take care of me. So contribution, as I know, so coming back to the same question, I asked you how many of these diseases are curable, and really we can count them with our fingers, that many are curable. But how many of them can we give care for? There is no limit. There is just no limit to caring and comforting. Every one of those diseases we can care for. So I request you to recall why you chose to do medicine or nursing, whether it was peer pressure, family pressure, prestige, income, fame and achievement, which used to be the reasons, or simply because you're conscientious, humanitarian, noble profession, whatever be the reason, please wear the patient's hat, be empathetic and progress in your work. And please understand that old people like me depend on you as doctors and nurses. And I would ask, how would ask the doctor what to think? How can I give the best possible care for this lady? And what do I need to know about this lady to help me provide the best possible care? You must ask me to know what is my needs. So as I discussed earlier, I would definitely want, when I'm in a chronic state of illness, I definitely want to manage my pain and other symptoms managed, not necessarily through intensive interventions and aggressive management. I want you to listen to me. Don't talk about me, but talk to me. Empower me with clear information. Give me enough information to make me autonomous and choose my care. And please respect my choices. In the last minute, you cannot say protocol and I intubate you and I put you. No, please respect my choices. Document them and make sure that they are seen by even night duty, duty doctors and staff. Please maintain my dignity. And so this is the thing. And my request to all of you as the future leaders of healthcare are nothing about me to be done without me. Thank you. And I give over the platform to the organizers. Thank you very much.